Welcome to the latest episode of the Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast. My name is Hunter Baumgardt, your host. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at HunterBOnAir. Also, feel free to like the Facebook page, Hunter Baumgardt Sports. You can watch or listen to the podcast. You can listen on SoundCloud or watch on YouTube. All you have to do is search Hunter Baumgardt Sports. Super excited to have you. Super excited for this episode. We've got a really fun guest, and I think you're going to be intrigued by this entire interview. Matt Pauly. He is the pregame and postgame host for the Milwaukee Brewers on WTMJ in Milwaukee, of course, the flagship station for the Brewers. Also, he is a host and anchor for SB Nation Radio, one of the biggest radio networks in the country. Also, he is the play-by-play announcer for the UWGB women's basketball team. I'm going to ask him about all of that coming up in this podcast. So stay tuned for Matt Pauly because it's going to be a really fun interview. Otherwise, hope you're staying healthy. I know the governor extended the stay-at-home order through May, so hopefully these podcasts can continue through that time to be entertainment and a distraction and maybe a sense of normalcy as well as we're talking about any of the different sports going on. So without any further ado, let's get to Matt Pauly. Joining us on the Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast, really excited to have him on the podcast today, is Matt Pauly. He is the Brewers pregame and postgame host on WTMJ in Milwaukee, also a host and anchor on SB Nation Radio, as well as the play-by-play announcer for the UWGB women's basketball team. You can follow him on Twitter at Matt Pauly on air. Matt, super excited to have you on the podcast today. Thanks so much for joining me.
You bet, Hunter. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. And first, I just want to ask you kind of what I'm asking all my guests right now. How's it going during this during this time with coronavirus? Obviously, you'd be hosting Brewers pregame and postgame shows right now, and you're not. So does that mean more time with the family, or are you working hard during the days?
Yeah, I still work hard during the day. My job with SB Nation Radio is kind of my full-time job, which is funny because during Brewer season, I spend more time with Brewer stuff than I do the other, but I end up working about 90 to 100 hours a week during baseball season. So right now I'm working kind of the standard 35 to 40 hours a week with SB Nation Radio, but it's really different. And I'm really blessed that I have the SB Nation Radio thing and that's my full-time job. And there are so many people out there that are struggling right now. And I don't want to make light of any of that, but it's weird right now. I'm a baseball guy. Before I was with the Brewers, I did 10 years of minor league baseball play-by-play. When at this time of the year, I am used to being at a ballpark on an everyday basis, and we don't have that right now. I miss doing the post-game shows. I miss everything about it. The silver lining is I do have a 14-month-old daughter. I've been able to play with her and have a lot more time with her. My wife and my daughter and I were eating dinner together all the time. So it's not all bad, but I really wish there was baseball right now.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I'm also baseball is my favorite sport. Played it growing up and coached it for the last 5 years. So I am desperately wanting some baseball, and hopefully we get it sooner rather than later. Tell us a little bit about what goes into your pre and post game. Do you do the show from the studio from Miller Park? Do you go to Miller Park on the daily? Kind of what's your day to day as far as being the pre and post host on the flagship station?
Yeah, so it's different if the team's at home or if the team's on the road. When the team is at home, I am at Miller Park, and we do the pregame show. Most games, if it's a 7:00 start, if it's a 6:40 start, we do it. If it's a day game, we don't do as much stuff because we have the regular WTMJ programming.
Sure.
But I'm not somebody who's there in the afternoon during batting practice as much. We've got other people from the station who kind of handle that part of the day, but I get there at the latest 5:00 and get ready to generally do a show at 6 leading into the network broadcast. So I do about a half hour, and then I watch the game at Miller Park. And when the game gets over, we do an hour and a half of extra post game after the network post game goes off the air. For home games, I'm generally joined by Craig Kashan from Fox Sports Wisconsin. Okay. For road games, it's generally Jerry Augustine who joins me over the phone. Those guys join me once they're Fox Sports Wisconsin obligations are done. They come do a little bit of radio with me, and that's kind of it. I like being able to get to the clubhouse as much as possible. I think it's important for somebody in my role to be seen in there. So if there is a home day game, I try to get to the ballpark and spend some time in the clubhouse before the game or after the game when I don't have the pregame show or the postgame show. I don't travel with the team, so when the team is on the road, I do work out of a studio for those games, but it's still the same. Although I'm watching the game on TV and I'm not watching it live, it's still nothing really changes in terms of pregame show or postgame show, other than the fact that I'm not seeing the game in the building.
Sure. How does this change? Obviously, like you said, you're used to going to the park every day when they have home games, et cetera, preparing for shows. How does this change not knowing when the season will start? Worst case scenario, if the season will start, how does that, are you still preparing, still reading up on guys, kind of keeping up the tabs on things? I mean, obviously there's not much going on, but how does, your preparedness or preparing for the shows that we may or may not have in a month or 2 months or 3 months going right now?
Yeah, there isn't a lot of stuff right now. That's the thing. I mean, there's big stuff. There's the proposals out there, the Arizona plan, the dual spring training plan. There's the issue that may exist between players and owners on if that agreement that they had before is still gonna, be in effect even if they play with no fans. So there's that stuff going on. It was actually good. I did a podcast yesterday, a national baseball podcast yesterday, and it was just good for me to kind of bring the roster back up and look at it again and kind of go back to where I was at as spring training was actually going on. But there's not a lot to say or do right now Brewers centric. I mean, any story that's been about the Brewers lately has been Christian Yelich and Ryan Braun providing meals for medical workers and things like that. There's nothing going on baseball wise. I talked to Tim Dillard, the former Brewers pitcher, on my podcast a couple weeks ago. And I asked him, like, what are you doing? And he said he's got a tarp up in his garage and he throws up against the tarp. Like that's what he's doing. He is a pitcher and all he can really do is put up a tarp in his garage and throw it and occasionally go play catch with his son as well. But everything is just stopped. There's nothing right now. It's so weird.
Yeah, it is so weird. Everybody's kind of resorting to what they did as a kid to practice baseball, in their garages or in their yards. Matt Pauly joining us, does the postgame and pregame for the Milwaukee Brewers on WTMJ, also with SB Nation Radio and the play-by-play announcer for the UWGB women's basketball team. Tell us a little bit about SB Nation Radio. I've been hearing that name a lot more lately. Tell us kind of what you do with SB Nation Radio, but also just in general what they do.
Yeah, so it's a national network. It's kind of the fourth network because you have ESPN Radio, you have CBS Sports Radio, you have Fox Sports Radio, and then you have SB Nation Radio. And the difference between those three and SB Nation Radio is those three are all owned by big radio groups, so they get clearance. If you're an Intercom station or you're a Cumulus station, you probably run CBS Sports Radio. If you're a Clear Channel or an iHeart station, you probably run Fox Sports Radio because of the ownership. So SB Nation Radio is a national network. It's been around for years and years and years. It's been Yahoo Sports Radio. It's been Sporting News Radio. I think it was maybe One-on-One Sports when it first got started. So it's been around, but it doesn't have the automatic clearance that other networks have. So one of the services that we're going to kind of open up the curtain for you a little bit.
Yeah.
One of the services that they offer their affiliates are localized sports updates. So generally it's for smaller stations. If you're a smaller station and maybe you don't have the staffing to have somebody to do sports updates, or maybe you have a morning sports update guy, but you don't have somebody to work in the afternoons, we provide localized sports updates for your station. So it's content to go along with the teams in your city, your region, so on and so forth. So I do that during the day. I'm just cranking out sportscast after sportscast that are localized to markets. And then I'm one of the fill-in hosts as well, where like this week, I'm doing a show on Thursday and I'm doing a show on Saturday. So I'll probably do 6-7 shows a month on the network as well. And they've got 200-300 affiliates across the country. They're not quite as big as some of those other ones, but they certainly have their place in the sports radio marketplace.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and I wanted to ask you about that because I know I've like I said, been hearing that name a little more lately, and I was interested to see switching a little bit to your third gig that you got going on with the UW Green Bay women's basketball team. So I saw they played for the Horizon League Championship this year in the tournament, and they went 19-13. Were they one of the teams that were kind of on the bubble to get in? Were they not going to get in, or were they going to get in and kind of crushed by the NCAA coming down and saying there's going to be no tournament this year?
Yeah, they weren't going to probably get into the NCAA tournament. They probably needed to win the Horizon League. The Horizon League is generally a one-bid league.
Okay.
Occasionally, 2 years ago when they won the league tournament, they didn't have to win the league tournament that year. They were in the top 25 much of the year, so they could have lost in the league tournament and got in. But this year it was a situation where they would have had to win the league tournament. They did get the league's automatic bid into the WNIT, though. So that day in Indianapolis in the Horizon League Championship, when they lost to IUPUI, we all left the gym that day thinking the season's not over. There's going to be the WNIT that they're going to play in. And it's really weird. Something has kind of stuck with me. I was walking out of the arena that day. It was a Tuesday. It was a Tuesday afternoon when they lost to IUPUI. And I looked down the hallway, and there's the team. And, they're crushed. They're not happy. And I live in Milwaukee. I don't live in Green Bay, so I don't see everybody as much as I'd like to. I'm pretty close with some members of the coaching staff, and it's a really tight-knit group that's a really cool group to be a part of. But I looked down, and I saw some of the coaches, and everybody was bummed out. And I started walking to go say goodbye. And I said, you know what? We got the WNIT. There's no goodbyes needed. I'll see them here in a week or so. They're probably going to be hosting a game in the WNIT, and then it didn't happen. And that's kind of stuck with me that I didn't go say goodbye to them. I got to see a lot of them yesterday on Zoom because they did their end-of-season banquet, and they did it on Zoom this year. And generally, I can't make it onto the banquet because of Brewers baseball. I've never been to a Green Bay women's basketball end-of-season banquet. So another one of the silver linings, even though it happened on Zoom and not in real life, I was able to, attend the banquet yesterday.
Sure. Matt Pauly joining us from the Brewers postgame and pregame show on WTMJ, as well as, like we just mentioned, the play-by-play for UW Green Bay women's basketball and SB Nation Radio as well. Final question for you, just kind of an all-encompassing, talking a little bit back to baseball. What do you think is the best way to go about this? How do you think they'll go about this with the return of sports? Obviously, it's so much up in the air, but there's been proposals, like you said, Arizona, Florida. What do you think is kind of what would you do, or what do you think will happen with this baseball season?
Yeah, I think we sometimes speak in terms of what's the best option.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more about what's the least terrible option.
Okay.
Because none of them are good.
Right.
It's not a good situation if you're putting every team in Phoenix. It's not a good situation if you're using just the spring training sites in Arizona and Florida. It's not a good situation if you're playing in an empty stadium, even in none of those are good situations. Those are a bad situation. So what's least terrible? And to me, the thing that makes the most sense is the Arizona plan. I know there's some players who have come out against it.
Yeah.
There's a bubble there. A lot of people say, well, why don't you use Florida too? The bubble is so much bigger in Florida. I don't know if people realize that the Cactus League and the ballparks in the Cactus League are really in the Phoenix area.
Yep.
Where when you go to the Grapefruit League, there are some long distances from one city to another in the Grapefruit League. That takes up almost the entire state of Florida. So to me, if you're going to want to control every area that teams are in, go to Arizona. If it gets to a point where teams can go and head back and be in their home stadium, whether it's an empty stadium situation or with fans, then you can go. The teams that can't get back, and I don't think California teams, especially early on, would have any chance of playing in there. Maybe you say the same thing about New York. You probably say the same thing about the Mariners. Those teams can maybe stay in Arizona. So you might start having a hybrid thing as the season goes along. And then one more thing, nobody is saying this, but it seems really simple to me.
Yeah.
There's a lot of players who have openly kind of complained about this. Clayton Kershaw the other day said, I just don't see how this can happen. And Mike Trout has openly spoken. He's got a kid on the way, and that all makes sense. Major League Baseball already has an agreement with players where they're making a certain amount of money to a certain point. And they're going to get that money whether the season is played or if the season is not played. And they've also got the agreement that they're getting their service time for this year, whether there's a season or not a season. I wouldn't have a problem if Major League Baseball said to players who didn't want to play, didn't want to do the Arizona thing, didn't want to be cut off from their family for 4 months, if they felt there was safety issues, they didn't trust Major League Baseball to really create this safe bubble and just wanted to sit out for the year, I would have no problem with Major League Baseball allowing that, still giving those players their service time, not paying them beyond what they've already guaranteed. Because if the question is either not have a season at all, well, then you pay those players that same amount of money and you give them service time. So they already have that. So give them that, and then give them the option to sit out the year if they want to, and maybe that eases the concerns. Now, does that mean Clayton Kershaw doesn't play this year? Maybe. And is baseball worse without Clayton Kershaw? Is baseball worse without Mike Trout? Certainly. But again, it goes back to what I said a moment ago. You're looking for the least terrible option, and to me, that's the least terrible.
Yeah, I don't think that there's going to be no sense. I saw a former commissioner for Major League Baseball say, I'm a traditionalist. I want let's not have baseball till fans can be back and we have normal baseball. I'm like, nothing about this year is going to be normal. I mean, no matter when they start, whether there's fans or not, it's just not going to be a normal year. It's already going to be shortened, and there's just going to be nothing normal about it. So like you're saying, just go with the least terrible plan. And if we can get baseball, back on our TVs, I'll be very happy, of course, safely. But like you said, I agree with that least terrible concept.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm a traditionalist as well. I love National League rules. I don't want to see them get rid of the DH. But if you go to that, the dual side, if they decide that the Arizona-Florida plan is the one that makes the most sense, then you're mixing American League and National League teams. Yeah. You can't have a DH in that situation. I'm not going to be upset about that this year. You get rid of it all time, which I think probably is going to happen eventually. I'm going to be upset about that. But this year, anything on the table, go with it. Do what you got to do to play baseball.
Matt, really appreciate the time this afternoon. I know you're busy with your family and work, but really appreciate coming on the podcast, and I'll definitely talk to you down the road.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me. That
is Matt Pauly, host of the pregame and postgame show for the Milwaukee Brewers on WTMJ in Milwaukee, also host and anchor on SB Nation Radio, and the play-by-play announcer for the UWGB women's basketball team. So it was great to talk to him about all those different jobs. You can follow him on Twitter at Matt Pauly on air. And it was really interesting to get his perspective, kind of, as he said, a peek behind the curtain about different things in radio and the radio business. So that's always interesting for me because that's where I'm going into sports radio. And as well as all the different nuances with the Brewers and what he thought about the MLB and their plans and what he think. I totally agree with him. Least terrible option, right? What is the least terrible option? Because nothing is going to be the best option when we go back and play baseball. It's going to be what's going to be least terrible, what's going to put players and coaches and all the staff, what's going to put them in the best position to succeed and be safe. And it might not be what everybody wants, but hopefully they'll come to a conclusion, and hopefully we can have baseball back soon in the next couple of months. But we shall see. Who knows at this point? Well, thanks so much for joining me again on the podcast. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at HunterBOnAir, as well as be sure to like the Facebook page, Hunter Baumgardt Sports. Of course, subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can watch the podcast there. You can listen on SoundCloud. Just search Hunter Baumgardt Sports. Thanks again for joining me. Hope you enjoyed the interview with Matt Pauly. Talk to you soon. Stay healthy. Stay inside. We've been having some great weather. It rained a little, but otherwise it's been some nice warmer weather, which is awesome. And you can get outside and walk around the block, etc. But as always, stay positive.